This video is brought to you by Atlas VPN. A tale can only be told so many times before it grows tired. There is perhaps no other tale that has been so mercilessly hacked to bits in art than the Arthurian Legend. This is something that goes back to before anyone ever conceived of film. King Arthur has been written for about 1200 years, give or take. Starting in the 9th century with the Historia Brittonum, which detailed a series of battles fought by Arthur, the legend was largely treated as an embellishment of a man who was believed, at the time, to have actually lived. Over the course of the next few centuries, the Arthurian myth was built upon and expanded into a fully realized iconic character, with his most famous hallmarks: the pulling of Excalibur from a stone, the Lady of the Lake, Arthur's wife Guinevere, being dated back to the 12th and 13th centuries. The overwhelming output of literary and theatrical works that revolved around King Arthur persisted for hundreds of years, to the point where, in perhaps humanity's first ever example of franchise fatigue, the masses lost interest as the Middle Ages waned through the year 1500. Cut to the 1800s and a rising movement of chivalric code. Because of the correlation between chivalry and the character of Arthur, interest in the latter also found a revival. It was in 1816 that Le Morte d'Arthur, one of the most significant works written about Arthur, was reprinted for the first time in nearly 200 years. The work of poet Alfred Tennyson, a legend in his own right, also generated renewed enthusiasm for the Arthurian legend, first with The Lady of Shalott in 1832, and then at the peak with Idyllus of the King in 1859, modernizing and reworking Arthur's narrative as a Victorian-era epic. Of course, within the next 100 years, movies happened, and the Arthurian legend burst onto the big screen with no sign of stopping. There have been dozens upon dozens of films chronicling Arthur, Excalibur, and the Knights of the Round Table, any combination of the above and more, from 1954's The Black Knight to 1981's Excalibur, to lampooning takes like Monty Python and the Holy Grail or The Fisher King. Even works that don't feature Arthur as the main character have been lavished with the big screen treatment time and time again. And just as was the case 500 years ago, the general decline of the medieval aesthetic and fantasy genre, along with other decay and interest surrounding the Arthurian legend, kind of caused King Arthur to fade from the big screen for a while. Every few years, a big budget, high profile Arthur film will pop up, but generally speaking, audiences just aren't as interested. But what if that could change? What if a film could come along that finally rejuvenated the mythos of the Arthurian legend and framed it in a new light? Something less indebted to the works and sensibilities of Tennyson, and instead more in line with how we view nobility and maturity today? What if a film could come along and challenge the centuries-old whitewashed portrayal of what it means to be a ruler? What leadership looks like? What if this film could take something that is viewed by audiences as archaic and past its time and repackage it in a way that actually speaks to the current generation, beyond just handing Charlie Hunnam a sword and slapping some Zack Snyder light effects on him? For the record, I actually enjoy Guy Ritchie's King Arthur. Well, folks, the film to spearhead that movement has arrived, and it is David Lowery and A24's The Green Knight. Before we get into why The Green Knight is one of the most important pieces of Arthurian legend-related media in decades, you'll probably want to pop open Kobo or some similar app and find some research material, but oh no! You found the book you really want to dive into is only sold digitally in the UK. Do you physically scour every bookstore and library within 50 miles in order to find it? No, of course not. You use Atlas VPN to get into the UK's digital book market and buy it with the tap of a button. Atlas VPN is a tool used by more than 4 million people worldwide that encrypts your data and hides your digital location, making it easier for you to find every last bit of literature you need on Sir Gawain without the hassle of being region locked out of supporting its writers and publishers. And of course, it doesn't stop there. Maybe you want to kick back with a lighthearted take on Arthurian myth and watch Monty Python and the Holy Grail on Netflix, but it's only streaming on Canadian Netflix. No problem. With Atlas VPN, you'll be laughing along to the Black Knight scene in no time. Want to watch The Office and Twin Peaks from Vancouver? Use Atlas VPN. Feeling left out of the HBO, Amazon Prime, and Disney Plus experiences? Atlas VPN is great for getting you access to whatever content you're missing on those platforms and more. Atlas VPN is supported on virtually any device or operating system as well, so you can enjoy it at home or on the go. Atlas VPN is currently running an awesome promotion where you can sign up for 3 years for only $1.39 a month. And the best part is, if you end up realizing that you don't need all of the extra King Arthur content after all, this deal comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. This offer won't last long, so make sure you head to the link in the description down below and check out Atlas VPN. And once again, thank you so much to Atlas VPN for sponsoring today's video. Now that we're all in on how to indulge ourselves in endless Arthurian media, let's take a look at The Green Knight. The film is based on the 14th century tale of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, one of the most famous stories in Arthurian legend. When King Arthur is confronted at Christmas by a giant Green Knight who challenges the Round Table to a game of blows, one knight may strike him then and there, but must be willing to receive the same blow in return the following Christmas. With none of his knights at first willing to partake in the game, Arthur himself nearly accepts when Gawain, his youngest knight and nephew, boldly rises to the challenge and strikes the hardest blow possible when he beheads the Green Knight. However, where this would invariably kill a normal person, the Green Knight simply picks up his own head, reminds Gawain of his newfound obligation to meet him in a year, and leaves. As the following Christmas draws near, Gawain leaves Camelot for the Green Chapel. He views the danger rather flippantly and the task trivial, almost to the point of not going. He crosses beyond the familiar region of his home into the vast unknown. He undergoes a series of tests on his way to his objective. He finds temptation in a woman that sends him on a tangent from said objective. He atones for the mistakes he made along the way and achieves his goal. And finally, Gawain returns home, changed by his story to the chapel forever. If that sounds at all familiar, it's because the story functions as a near-perfect forebearer to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, as outlined in the latter's 1949 book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, therefore beating Campbell to the punch by nearly 600 years. Of course, the story's popularity only recently exploded around the same time as Tennyson's Arthurian works were first published, but it's easy to see what with its familiar, comfortable, and practically fail-safe story structure, why it has remained a mainstay of literature for nearly 200 years since. Hell, Lowery's film doesn't even represent the first time Sir Gawain and the Green Knight has been adapted to the screen, but the 6th. So what does Lowery achieve here that not only separates his work from the pack, but enables it to break free of the monotony of previous fanciful adaptations like Sword of the Valiant, but also not look like an imitation of superficially dour entries like 2004's King Arthur? Well, Lowery first finds it in the way that he portrays Camelot. This is not the fantastical, garrisoned medieval haven of Arthurian lore. Instead, Camelot is shown to us as a place far past its prime, a decaying mess helmed by a walking corpse rather than a glorious king. Arthur is walking on numbered days, his body beginning to fail him with age. Guinevere is still beautiful, but she too is decaying. Both are a product of the stress and wear that comes with ambition and the insurmountable task of maintaining one's legend. And childless, not to mention far past the point where they could have born a child. The future of their kingdom is in jeopardy. What was all of that fighting, all of the legend building for, if it's all going to fade to time in a generation or two, surrendered to a new bloodline? This is not the core premise of the film, but it is the setting we find ourselves in at the beginning alongside Gawain, and it brilliantly informs practically every single action Gawain takes right up until the film smashes into a title card ending. It also suits this version of Gawain. He's perhaps gotten a few years into his 20s, if even that, and he too is decaying. He sleeps his nights away with the mistress, indulges in drink, finds little in the way of productivity in Camelot, and then washes, rinses, repeats. His mother, Morgana, sees this, her dismay palpable. It is strongly implied that she manipulates the arrival of the Green Knight such that Gawain is the one who challenges him, is the one forced on a journey of discovery. She is not trying to send her son to his death, rather she is providing him with the opportunity to truly become a knight, to stake his claim as a successful heir to the throne. She thrusts greatness upon Gawain since he refuses to seek it out himself, and as a result, motivates him into seizing the opportunity. However, the price of this newfound ambition is that Gawain initially overcorrects. He becomes hungry for the glory that must surely follow his fulfillment of the Green Knight's game, relishing in the adventure and later in the promise of what awaits afterwards. Gawain becomes so invested in his triumphant return that he begins to falter in understanding why he's gone on the journey to begin with. It's not about glory or fame or even the throne. It's about finding the selfless strength within himself to risk giving it up in the name of honesty, of good sporting with the Green Knight in the game, of living up to the name of Arthur in the only way that matters, finding nobility in courage and strength rather than the throne itself. Gawain has a vision where he cowers away from the Green Knight's returning blow in order to survive, but also so that he can return home and receive the glory that comes with his return, the throne included. But this reveals a Camelot that falls further into decay and eventually falls completely under his rule. And after all that Gawain truly receives as a reward is to lose his head anyway, having merely delayed his death by a couple decades of sadness. Ultimately, Gawain seems under-serious of the throne. He only makes for the Green Chapel because it's what he is supposed to do. He even has to be urged, after all, by Arthur. And while the notion of being a legend might have a certain appeal to him when he leaves, by the time he bows his neck to the Green Knight's axe, he realizes that a legend of his day, a king of his day, is formed out of selfish ambition. And if that's the requirement of the throne, why even pursue it? The legacy of one who accepts his fate and fulfills his bargain with another knight is far more noble. It is more mature, and in coming to terms with this, Gawain truly comes into adulthood. Conversely, the old man we see on the throne in his vision never transcended his adolescence. Thankfully, the Gawain of the present chooses to do the opposite in every imaginable way. But of course, it's not as if Gawain goes on his journey just during his time at the Green Chapel. It's a process, a constantly changing one, a stripping away of the foolish punk he began the film as to reveal the mature and brave knight hidden underneath, that he initiates the moment he departs the gates of Camelot. The very first thing he does nearly dooms him, as he attempts to make foolish haste for the chapel, allowing himself to be tricked, captured, and robbed by bandits who claim to know the way, nearly causing his death among the elements. It is when he takes shelter in a seemingly abandoned cottage that he exercises a more calculated, cautious, observant nature. When the spirit of Saint Winifred approaches him, he hesitates to place a large amount of trust in her, understandably. However, he also finds it in himself to relax and listen to her. And though he initially wants a reward for giving her remains the dignity they deserve, ultimately Gawain takes the time to fulfill her request rather than just immediately selfishly moving on towards the chapel. As a reward for his altruistic deed, one which seemed to have no discernible reward, the Green Knight's axe is returned to him as if it was lifted from the bandits who robbed him and then dropped back to earth by the heavens. When Gawain later meets the Lord and Lady and spends the last few days before Christmas with them, Gawain's flaws are brought back to the light in some ways. His ability to be a leech, to succumb to temptation, to think with the head between his legs rather than the one he risks losing to the Green Knight, come back to the surface when the lady confronts him in his bed. After all, it has only been a matter of days since he left Camelot, and while he has certainly experienced personal growth in that time and had his eyes open to the possibilities of his humanity, it's not as if a person can just break bad habits overnight. Anyone must take the time to develop the habits and behaviors that replace the bad ones. Even a wannabe knight such as Gawain. This is also where the film makes its biggest deviation from the text of the story. In the story, the Green Knight is revealed to just be the Lord in disguise, having set Gawain on his journey as part of a trick orchestrated by Morgana. In the film, while it's hinted that Joel Edgerton's Lord might be the Green Knight with some visual trickery, he's mostly an entirely different person, making him more of a force of nature in the world incarnate. It ties into the lady's speech about the color green and how man tries to put nature under his thumb and conquer or even destroy it, rather than find a way to harmonize with it. It could be seen as a major factor in Camelot's decline, and ultimately just functions as a pointless ego trip, which is also what the journey to the chapel initially functions as for Gawain. It's when he chooses not to cower, but instead to steel himself and face the the blow of the Green Knight's axe, removing the sash given to him for protection, that Gawain surrenders to nature and respects what his true place is in the ecosystem. It strengthens his development as a man. So much of Gawain's misfortune has to do with his own ego, but also the film deconstructs the notion of nobility, what makes someone worthy of legend, and I think these tests he fails throughout his quest shows that he's not cut out for that. He has a lot of growth to go through. He's still immature and thinks that because he's the nephew of King Arthur, this will be a walk in the park. He'll go get his story and then be the future king. But is he worthy of all of that? By the end, we understand that no, he's not. He's kind of spineless and only doing the quest because it's expected of him, without really a care for his actions. Yeah, he has a lot of obstacles thrown at him, but a true nobleman, a true knight, someone who's reached maturity and growth, would understand the true value of information. Helping a lost soul in need shouldn't require payment, and coveting another man's wife and then hiding it from that man himself is wrong. He sleeps with the lady. She shames him for failing the test, questioning his nobility, and then he lies to the Lord to his face, bestowing only a kiss to him, implying that that was the only thing he found in the castle, instead of the belt, or revealing he slept with his wife. In the original poem, and actually in the film too, the Lord is actually the Green Knight, and when he learns of Gawain's sinful behavior, he basically teaches him a lesson. And it's not just because he slept with his wife, but because of the actions that led to that. I mean, even Lowery says that he wanted Gawain to be this pathetic, sniveling loser who you sort of question why you're rooting for him. To simplify this whole thing, Gawain is a person who overindulges, constantly takes from others without giving anything in return or without consequences. And in the end, it's that karma that comes back to him. In the poem, he doesn't die. He merely gets a scratch on the neck and then returns home a changed man. Lowery's film is a bit more ambiguous, and it actually makes him face the consequences of his actions rather than get a slap on the wrist. But you could also look at it as the knight letting him go after the scratch. Either way, Gawain becomes a man, and he's learned his lesson. David Lowery remarked on how casting Dev Patel, one of the most generous, likable actors working today, as Gawain was necessary. Gawain starts the story as a lecherous, snotty, arrogant punk to a point where an audience would lack investment in this character. Patel's casting, at least, places all of the character's unlikable traits under a charismatic and agreeable facade, ensuring that we don't loathe Gawain and at least want to see him try to be better. That's the central journey of the film, and the juxtaposition between how much we love Dev Patel and dislike Gawain's demeanor is a first stone in the path that must be placed in order for it to work. It helps us believe when he does eventually realize that what he's been chasing is something wicked and selfish, and ironically something that Gawain doesn't even truly desire, when he finds the courage to truly face the knight and allow him the opportunity to strike Gawain down if he wishes, fulfilling the agreement he made on behalf of his king, that he has earned this discovery. And so when the Green Knight praises Gawain, the latter having found his dignity and bravery, therefore truly completing the game in the way the Green Knight desired, it feels earned, and it comes as a relief to the audience rather than as an injustice. Honestly, the most archaic and weakest element of the original story is the twist at the end, revealing that the Green Knight is a facade. It undermines Gawain's journey and just seems like a narrative trick. Now, look, I know the story is 700 years old and narrative conventions were hardly identical to what they are today, and I don't want to seem like I'm ripping it apart. Rather, I think the film just deserves a lot of praise for the way it modernizes the story's conclusion and turns an old-fashioned story into something that should be emulated with Arthurian lore moving forward, making the Green Knight a force of nature rather than a manifestation of man's ego of nobility allows the character to exist free of the audience's own projections onto him. In the original story, he mercifully allows Gawain to leave with his life just because. You know, he learned his lesson, that's fine, go ahead, shoot. Here, it's more open to interpretation. I think the Green Knight kills Gawain after the credits roll, him having to pay the price for his arrogance and selfishness and honoring his oath as the man he has become and sparing Camelot of certain destruction, and it appears so does David Lowery. But for anyone who believes Gawain survives, there's at least more of a rationale given for the Green Knight sparing him. The original story starts with Gawain already being an established knight of the Round Table. The film starts with him as an ignoble punk who is reluctantly invited to sit at Arthur's right, who must go on a true journey to find his knighthood and be a better man. What David Lowery has done with the Green Knight is transformative in itself. It shows how the Arthurian legend doesn't need to die out in fiction. We just have to be willing to find a way to make it suit modern sensibilities better. We have to give its central characters a proper arc while still remaining true to who they are. Don't just drop us in a story with King Arthur and a knight. Give us a young man with vices and arrogance and an unclear destiny, and invest us in his journey to become a man and discover himself. The Green Knight does all of that in spades, and that is why it's not only the Arthurian film we need right now, it could even be the best dramatic Arthurian film to date.